At the height of the 2008 financial crisis, the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, came home from work one day to his daughter asking him, "What is a financial crisis?" To which he responded with, "Something that happens every 5 to 7 years." If you've been following the news on the markets and the economy, it's no surprise at this point that financial crises are bound to happen one of these days. But as I always preach on this channel, the best financial protection you can ever have is financial education. So that's why in this video, we'll be exploring why there's a financial crisis roughly every 8 years, give or take a few. But to understand the ups and downs of the economic cycle, we must first understand how money and credit are created. Once upon a time, gold was used as money. But in the second half of the 19th century, with the rise of transportation and communications technology, it made it much easier for banks to communicate with each other. This led to the increased use of bills, checks, and paper receipts as monetary media, while the majority of the gold that backed the notes just sat in vaults. It became clear to the early banks that not all the gold they held in their vaults would be withdrawn at any one time. A certain proportion of the gold that was not being withdrawn could therefore be lent to others at a rate of interest. And by doing this, the early banks essentially created money and consequently credit. The creation of money and credit allowed for the expansion of business and economy and allowed for new entrepreneurs the opportunity to create and own profitable businesses and property, essentially giving more and more people the opportunity to generate wealth for themselves, their children, and their grandchildren. But it's not a perfect system. This system of money creation operates on the major assumption that not all customers will want to pull their money out of banks at the same time. This is known as a bank run. And in the event of a bank run, the results are usually disastrous because there isn't enough gold or cash reserves in bank vaults for everyone to get their money back, and people, as well as businesses, can go bankrupt as a result. It's really important to have a good understanding of how money and credit are created in order to understand economic cycles. If you want to learn more on this, make sure to check out this video right here on fractional reserve banking. But if you do understand it, let's move on to how financial crises actually happen. The money and credit that are now issued by central banks have no intrinsic value. They are essentially journal entries in an accounting system that can easily be changed. While money and credit are associated with wealth, they are not the same thing as wealth. Money and credit can buy wealth. For example, goods, services, or the ownership of businesses and property. But you cannot create more wealth simply by creating more money and credit. In order to create more wealth, you have to be more productive. The relationship between the creation of money and credit and the creation of wealth is often confused, yet it is the biggest driver of economic cycles. When the rate of production can't keep up with the rate of creation of money and credit, there is a market bubble. Over time, the gap between an economy's capacity for production and the amount of money and credit in circulation becomes larger and larger. When this gap becomes overextended, the bubble bursts and the economy experiences a pullback. This pullback is essentially money and credit readjusting to a level that's closer to an economy's production capacity, aka money and credit readjusting back to the level of intrinsic wealth present in an economy. But this readjustment can be painful since a lot of paper wealth gets wiped out in the process. That's why we see bankruptcies during economic pullbacks. But bankruptcies usually happen to the entities that don't have the productivity or the intrinsic value value to back up their paper wealth. Those are the very entities that get wiped out. Think about it this way. The difference between money and wealth means that there is both a financial economy and a real economy. Each has its own supply and demand factors that drive it. In the real economy, supply and demand are driven by the amount of goods and services produced and the number of buyers who want them. When the level of goods and services demanded is strong and rising and there is not enough capacity to produce the things demanded, the real economy's capacity to grow is limited. If demand keeps rising faster than the capacity to produce, prices go up and inflation rises. That's where the financial economy comes in. Factoring inflation, central banks normally tighten money and credit to slow demand in the real economy. When there is too little demand, they do the opposite by producing money and credit to stimulate demand. They do this through the process of fractional reserve banking that was briefly explained earlier in this video. The purpose of that system is to help allocate resources efficiently so that productivity can grow, rewarding both lenders and borrowers. But the system periodically breaks down. By raising and lowering supplies of money and credit, central banks are able to raise and lower the demand and production of financial assets, goods, and services. But they're unable to do this perfectly. So in periods of roughly 8 years, we experience alternating periods of growth and recession. Hey guys, here on this channel, we're all about achieving financial freedom so you can be empowered to live life on your own terms. And to get you there faster, you can now get 50% off Seeking Alpha Premium by checking out the link in the description below. Join a community of over 200,000 members and get access to all premium articles and news, expert market analysis, exclusive quant ratings, earnings calls, powerful stock screeners, and so much more. And as investors, who doesn't love getting great value at a discount? So make sure to check out the link in the description below, and thank you so much for your support. Let's get back to it. Related to this confusion between the financial economy and the real economy is the relationship between prices of things and the value of things. When people have more money and credit, they are more inclined to spend more and can spend more. To the extent that spending increases economic production and raises the prices of goods, services, and financial assets, it can be said to increase wealth because the people who already own those assets become quote-unquote richer when measured by the way we usually account for wealth. However, that increase in wealth is more of an illusion than reality for two reasons. One, the increase in credit that pushes prices and production up has to be paid back, which, all things being equal, will have the opposite effect when the bill comes due. And two, the intrinsic value doesn't increase just because the price goes up. For example, if you own a house and the government creates a lot of money and credit, there might be many eager buyers who would push up the price of your house. But it's still the same house. Your actual wealth hasn't increased, just your calculated wealth. This is also true for other assets. So therefore, using the market values of what one owns to measure one's wealth gives an illusion of changes in wealth that don't really exist. As far as understanding how the economy works, the important thing to understand is that money and credit are stimulative when they're given out and depressing when they have to be paid back. That's exactly what normally makes money, credit, and economic growth so cyclical. Think of the central bank as having a bottle of stimulant that it can inject into the economy as needed. When the markets and economy sag, it delivers shots of the money and credit stimulant to pick them up. When the markets and economy are too strong, it gives them less or no stimulant. These moves lead to cyclical rises and declines in the amount of prices of money and credit and of goods, services, and financial assets. As Ray Dalio described in his book, The Big Debt Cycle, these moves typically come in the form of short-term debt cycles and long-term debt cycles. The short-term debt cycle of the ups and downs is the the financial crises that we always experience every 8 years or so, give or take a few. The timing is determined by how long it takes the stimulant to raise demand to the point that it reaches the limits of the real economy's capacity to produce. Throughout history, though, central governments and central banks have created money and credit, which weaken their own currencies and raise their levels of monetary inflation to offset the deflation that comes from economic contractions. This typically happens when debt levels are high, interest rates can't be adequately lowered, the creation of money and credit increases financial asset prices more than it increases actual economic activity. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? At such times, those who are holding debt, which is essentially someone else's promise to pay them money, typically want to exchange the debt they're holding for other storeholds of wealth. Once it is widely perceived that money and debt assets are no longer good storeholds of wealth, a restructuring of the monetary system has to occur. This is exemplified by Germany following the hyperinflation phase in the 1920s, or the Great Depression in the United States that led to Bretton Woods and the New World Order that existed since 1945. So if you like this video, make sure to check out this one on stagflation and the state of our economy. I'm Caitlin, have the best day ever, and I'll see you in the next one.